Okay. Okay, so today's week 2. Today's Monday, July 31st, 2017. And uh, today's mentoring will be focusing on reviewing last weekend's material. So last weekend, Saturday and Sunday, we went over how to like the purpose of a class and like the objects, knowing what a class and object is, and knowing like the importance of it. We also went over like creating the structure of it, right? So here I have a notepad, right? This is my goals for today. Okay, so hopefully by today, right, we're gonna learn how to create a class, right? It like we know how to describe the structure of a class. We'll learn how to declare and initialize variables, and we're gonna talk about the types of variables. We're gonna also learn how to create and define constructors. We're going to learn how to create a constructor. We're going to learn the types of constructors and also the this keyword. We're also going to learn about methods. We're going to learn how to create a method, and we're going to learn about some basic methods like a get and set method, right? Then we're going to use that class, and then we're going to create an object. We're going to talk about this, like how to create an object, and then we're going to talk about static variables and static methods, and we're also going to talk about final. And then, if we have time, we're going to follow with going over an API, right? Java API, specifically string and the scanner. All right. Okay. So if you guys don't know, there's a mentoring folder, right, in your Selenium July 2017 class. Inside that mentoring folder, if you go to week one, I have these terms here. These terms are very important to understand. If you don't know, basically what we're doing right now is we're writing code, right? We're writing a program, right? So it's basically same thing as writing an essay, right? If you don't know what some definitions of words are or what they mean, you're not going to be able to write an essay. So you're going to need to know Java terms, right? So here I have like some terms that you need to know at least for this week's, right? And just have it open up in case you need to like refer to it later on. And also I have a PowerPoint, right? If you click on this PowerPoint, I talk about creating the how to create a Java project, and also inside there I give a detailed, friendly way of telling you guys how to create a method, how to create a class, right? How to create a constructor. So here I talk about the keynotes of Java. Let's simply review, right? So what are the five important things, right? You need to know about Java. Java is all about class and objects, right? Every application needs at least one main method. Java is strongly typed. Java is case sensitive, and Java has an automatic garbage collector. Okay, so here we look at a drawing, right, of a Java project. So in the outside of the box, right, you would have the Java project itself. Inside that Java project, you would have package or packages, right? Depending on you, how many. It's It all depends on you how and on your project, right? And inside a package, you will have a class, right? Or you could have multiple classes. But once again, if you go back, right, every Java application needs at least one main method. So here, class A, uh, that that's our main class, right? It contains the main method. And then class B, it has like variables, methods, and constructors, right? Here I talk about the structure of a Java class, right? Um, Once again, I made this friendly in a friendly way, meaning that I used colors, right? It sounds like it looks like elementary, right? But it helps, right? So here I say the access specifier, right? That's red. So if you go to the next slide, you look at an example of a Java class. So this is the access specifier public, right? So I also say that's So then is followed by the class, right? That's a keyword that stays. So after public, you would say class, and then you would say, write the name of your class, right? And this would be this open curly brace is the start of a class body, and this ends it, right? So everything inside here is what you're gonna define your class, right? So usually at the top of your class, you declare or initialize your variables, right? You and then it's followed by creating constructors, and then you usually have methods, right? After that. So here I have an example of a Java class called employee. So employee is my class name, right? And typically when you create a class, you want to capitalize the first letter of every word, right? So if your class were to have two words, you would capitalize the first letter of the first word and the second and the first letter of the second word. Okay, so you see here we have the access specifier class followed by the name of class, which is public class employee, right? And now we want to declare our variables. So here in this class, we have two variables declared. We declared a string name, right? Name is the variable name, and string is the what type of variable it is, the variable type. And then we have another variable we declared. We called it age, and it's integer type. Then it's followed by constructors, right? We're going to learn how to create constructors, but right here you can see we have two constructors. And then we have a method here, right? Which is green, right? So you have your methods there. You could have multiple methods, right? So what are variables in Java? Um, there are two types of variables in Java, right? We have primitive and reference. So primitive consists of Boolean, byte, short, character, integer, long, float, and double. It's up to you guys to know what these data types can hold and consist of. So if I were to and there's also reference types, right? So the strings, arrays, and objects, right? So here are examples of primitive variables, right? A Boolean, you can only hold the value true or false, right? So if you were to initialize a Boolean variable, here's an example, right? So I have Boolean is present. Is present is the my variable name, right? So I would say, so I created this variable. Let's say if I'm taking attendance, right? So inside my method, I'm gonna have if that student is present or not, right? So if that student, if you guys are here in the mentoring session, I would label it. I would give it the value true. So that's what a Boolean basically does. If they're not here, I'm gonna give it false, right? And then you have a byte short, right? Byte short and int, these hold numbers, right? But it holds, and also long, it holds numbers as well. But long holds a bigger number. It can hold up to I forgot the exact number, but you could look it up. It's a really big number. But typically, most people use integer. Character that takes character is literally speaks for itself. Only can take one character, right? So here's how we initialize a character. This is an example of a character. So we say car, right? char, and then like my name is Fahim, right? So I would create a variable called first initial, and I would give it the character F, capital F, right? You could put lowercase, you could put special characters, you could put anything you want as long as it's one character, right? It has to be part of the ASCII code. Okay, so then you have float and double, right? Float and double. I forgot to add it here, but you would have to add an F, right? Once you initialize a float variable, you would add an F here. So these are almost identical. It's just that double can hold a longer number, just like how int can hold a longer number than short. That's what float and double is. So any questions on variables before we move on? Can we move on? Yes or no? All right. Okay, so now we have, here's an example of reference variables, right? So string, right? That's my that's the type, right? So it's a string type. An organization, that's the name of the string. And then I just said I gave it the value, right? People in tech. Here's an array. You guys don't need to worry about array right now, right? You guys will learn about it in a couple of weeks. And then we have object, right? So we'll learn what an object is later. So here, you guys need to understand the terms, right? So if you're declaring something, right, you're just you're basically letting the world know that it's declared, right? It doesn't have a value yet. That's what declaring variables is, right? So here is you have the variable type followed by the variable name, right? And obviously you end it with a semicolon, right? So if I were to declare a number, right, a variable name called number, so I would say, and it's integer type, so I would say int number, right? That's it. If I were to declare a variable called name, that's a string type, I would say string name, right? If I were to declare a boolean, right, is absent, I'll say boolean is absent. And so this is how you declare variables. So what do you call when you give a value to a variable, right? So what if I were to give these values, right? That's called initializing variables. Initializing variables, once again, you give it a value. So if I were to initialize um, my variable number, which is an integer type, right? Let's say I want to initialize it to 30. I would say int number equals 30, right? So 30 is your value, variable name is your number, and variable type is integer, right? So once again, right here, so if I say string name equals John Doe, so I'm asking you guys this question, right? So this is legit, right? John Doe. What if I were to say string name equals 30? Would that make sense? Yes or no? If I were to initialize a variable called and name it like how I'm gonna do in the chat right now. So 30. If you look in your chat, is that a legit initialization? So I have string, right? Um, Name equals 30. Does that make sense? Once again, it's a if you go back to our slide, right? Java is a strongly typed language, right? So it definitely matters what type of variable you're dealing with, right? So since right here string name is 30, 30 is a number. That's not a string type. If you're using a string type, you would have to include quotes, right? So that's a good declaration, right? So as long a string has to consist of quotes. So you have to be consistent when you're initializing your variables, right? So for example, if I boolean is absent equals true, right? So this is a good initialization, right? But what if I were to say boolean um, is here no, or what if I were to, yeah, just like this. Is that correct? Yes or no? And can you guys give me the reason why this is incorrect? Exactly. So we're dealing with a Boolean type here, right? So what kind of values can Boolean use, right? It could only hold true or false values. So no, right? Inside a string, this is a string, right? But the thing is, our typing here, it only involves with true or false. So we either have to give this a true or false value. So we could just say false or true, right? So once again, Java is strongly typed. You guys have to be careful of what you're assigning your variables, right? So double income, right? I would say 89,000.85. So this is how you declare variables, and this is how you initialize variables, right? Okay, so does anyone have questions on variables? Because variables are very important, especially when we're creating our class and we need to define our class. You need to know how to declare and initialize variables, and you need to understand the typing. Okay, so the reason why we use double quotations, right? The reason we use double quotation is to it's used for string, right? String is basically a a group of characters, right? So this is a character right here. So a character takes in like basically one character, right? But if you have multiple characters like this, right? You would need to use double quotations, and this would be called a string. String, it could have letters, it could have special characters, it could have spaces, right? It could have numbers, right? That's considered a string, right? As long as it's under double quotation. So so if I were to say string, right? Line one equals, is that a valid string? Yes or no? Yeah. Okay, so what about this one? Is that a valid string? Why? Why not? It's because we're using single quotations, right? So when you're involving with string, you want to use double quotations, right? So what about this? Is this valid right here? Um, is that valid? Yes or no? That is wrong. Character, once again, character, it takes in one quotation since we're only dealing with one character, right? So you can't a character cannot use double quotation. It could only use one, right? What about this? If this is this valid? Is that valid? Yes or no? This is not a character, right? It has more than one. It has more than one basically character right here, right? It has two characters, so it has to that. So if you want to change this, you would have to make this a string, right? And then you would also use double quotations, right? So do you guys understand the difference between character and string, right? You guys also need to understand the concept of what values you guys are giving to that variable. It has to be consistent with the variable type you declared, right? Once again, if I were to say, let's say, is that valid? Yes or no? No, right? Because this is a double value, right? So you would need to use a double type. So you would either need to change this value to an integer, or you would need to change this type to a double, right? So let's change this to a double. We could have said that, right? Or we could have just done, if you want to leave this integer type, you just say 31, right? Um, okay, so any questions on variables? No, right? So once again, if you look into our PowerPoint, right? Example, the structure of a Java class. You need to know how to declare variables and how to initialize variables. So I didn't put initialize variables here, but in some classes, you can initialize your variables. But once again, it's very important, right? That's one third of knowing how to make a class. If you don't know how to create, if you don't know how to declare or initialize your variables, you're gonna have a hard time. So for integer, you don't need a quote. Remember, quote a, this, right? I'm gonna write it down here. String, right? It uses quotations, right? Character uses that, right? Um, double, right? Uses a decimal, right? float, it's a decimal, right, followed by an F. So that's basically, if you were to say let's say 0.5, right? So you would say 0.5, example, 0.5 F, right? That's it. What other things you need to know? Okay, Boolean, right? That's either true or false, right? Okay, so is everyone up to date with their variables and know how to declare and initialize? Once again, you can go back to my PowerPoint and just read the slides, and you guys will be able to understand, right? So everyone knows what a string is, right? I use a double quotation. Everyone knows a character, double, float, boolean. Okay, let's move on. Um, so now we know how to declare and initialize. Now, let's look at a method, right? So we're just going over this briefly, and then we're going to create a class, right? And then we're gonna look over how this works. So now we're looking at the structure of a Java method, right? So structure of a Java method. Once again, I made this color friendly, right? So you could refer to it, right? Red, red, purple, purple, right? So the first thing you have is access specifier, right? You have public, protected, private, right? Um, we use public, right, in order to uh, basically accessibility, right? We use public so we could use it from outside of the class, basically outside of packages as well. That's why you mainly see public being used, right? You'll learn about you learn when to use protected and private later on, right? But let's just use public for now. And then you have the method type and the which will give you the return type basically, right? So you have the method return type as your second thing, right? And if you come here, the method you can there's a return type, right? Which will return a primitive and reference. What are primitive and reference variables, right? You just go up. These are primitive and reference variables. So your method can return anything here. It could return anything here. It could return a string, arrays. It could even return objects, right? So that's what your method can return. And then the non-return, right? It's called void, right? Simply void. It does not return anything. The name speaks for itself, right? And then you have the method name, right? You want to give it a reasonable name, right? Let's say if I were to create a method, right? And the algorithm of that method adds two numbers, right? So what kind of method name would I give it? I would want to give it like add two numbers or add or something, right? I don't want to say like multiply or like something like table or like uh, get the total average, right? You want to give it an appropriate name, right? Of what your method is doing, what the function is doing. And then you have the parameters, right? So one thing you guys need to understand, right? The importance of your parameter. Uh, so let's say your method body, right? That's where you're doing your algorithm and your code. So the parameter helps you um, write your method body. So let's say if I were to, so let's look at this example right here, right? So my goal is to add two integer numbers, right? But in order to add two integer numbers, right, I would actually need the two integers, right? I cannot write this method if I don't have two integers. So two integers have to be passed in the parameter, right? If your method says hello and whatever your name is, right? You need a parameter that takes in the string name. So then you could print out system.out hello and then whatever that name was, right? So parameter is very important. You guys need to understand like what you need to put inside your parameter for your method. We'll go over this. We'll go over an example later on when we're creating our class, right? So here are some examples, right, of methods. So what kind of return type is this? Does this method have right here? So the return type is integer, right? So it's returning an integer, right? But it's returning result. Uh, does that make sense for you guys? Why is it returning result? If the return type is int, why is it returning a result? So we said how this, right, it's the return type, and here it's an integer, right? So it's supposed to return an integer. Why is it returning a result? Anyone know? Just look inside the method body. Why is it returning exactly, right? Result. What do we declare? What do we initialize result to be, right? So first of all, you see result right here, right? We basically initialize result. Result is what type? It's an integer type, right? And we set it to the values a plus b. So we're allowed to return result because we declared it here as an integer, right? If we were to say double result, would we get an error if we were to write it like this? If we change it to double, will we get an error? So if we were to change this right here, this integer right here, to double, would we get an error? So let me just write this down in right here so you guys get an uh, okay, so that's our method, right? So if we were to change this right here to double, right? Um, well, first of all, let's have it int, right? And let's say when you call on this, when we call on this method, right? So we say add, right? And we say 10 and 15. What would this give us right here? Right? So here we're calling the method, right? So we're calling the method name add, right? So add, this is the method right here. This is the method name. And since it takes in two parameters, int a and b, I gave it two parameters, 10 and 15. So what should this print out? 25, right? Do you guys understand why? So I call on this method, and I pass in 10 as the first parameter and 15 as the second parameter. So then it would have 10 as integer a and 15 as integer b, right? So then you say int result equals a plus b. So what is a? Is 10, right? And what is b? Is 15. So 10 plus 15 is 25. So int result equals 25, right? And then you're returning the result. What value does result contain? It contains 25. So then it's going to return 25, right? So let's say if we were to change this to double, right? Um, are we going to get an error? Yes or no? Yes, right? What would that error be? Our Eclipse is going to cry that you declared an integer return type here, right? And you're returning result, and result is double type. So what? So if you were to add a and b using double, it would still give you 25, right? So we could if you were to change this method, right, instead of changing this back to integer, how else would you change it? If you were to fix this method without changing the type of double, how would you change it? There's three things you would need to fix, right? So you would need to change this, right? And also you would also need to change the parameters, right? Double A, double B, right? Since here, right? Since that double is involved, A plus B is involved in the value of double, right? So you would need to change the parameters that would involve that type. So let's just change it back to int. But as long as you guys understand, like, if you guys can notice the error, right? If you change one thing, you would need to change the other stuff. So does that make sense for everyone, right? If you change this, right, to double, you're gonna need to change everything else, right? You have to be consistent, right? Okay, so let's go. Let's move on. So that's basically a structure of a Java method. You have the access specifier, followed by your method return type, followed by your method name, then your parameter, and then whatever inside the method body. You guys will learn more about like if and else and all those stuff. But right now, we're just gonna learn about simple method bodies, like system.out and all this stuff. So yeah, so basically when I call the method here, right? So on my main class, right? When I'm calling the method, I call the method name, right? So so first of all, I would have to create an object, right? So let's say that object name is obj, right? Then I would press dot, and I would have access to that class's method, right? Inside that class method, I say add, and since this takes in two parameters, I would have to fill in two parameters, right? Let's say if this, okay, so let's say if there was a method that said right, and it takes in a string name parameter, right? First of all, do you guys understand what this method does? Does anyone understand what this method does? Does anyone have questions about this method? So first of all, this method is called hello, right? Why do we use void? Why didn't we? Why are we using a different return type? Because we're not returning anything here, right? We're just using a system.out, right? We don't need to get we don't need to return any value, right? We're just printing something out, right? So that's why we use void. So this prints out to the console, right? It's gonna print out a string, and then we're gonna concatenate it, and we're gonna say name, right? So name is passed on from this parameter, right? So let's say I call it, right? So I say obj, right? The object. I would say hello, right? That's my method name. And let's say I want this to print out hello Fahim, right? What would I put inside my parentheses right here? Do I need to put anything here? Yes or no? Yes, right? I need to put something inside there because this method, it takes in the string parameter. So I wanted to print out hello Fahim, right? So I would have to say Fahim, right? So now that Fahim is passed in the string parameter, and it would print out hello plus name, right? And name was Fahim, so it would say hello Fahim. Do you guys understand that, right? Now you guys understand why you guys need parameters and the parameter call, and when you're using that classes method, right? You're gonna need to fill out the information. It's you're gonna see it when we're doing the constructor as well, right? Okay. So speaking of constructor, this is a structure of a constructor. Okay. Same thing, right? You have the access specifier, right? But now we don't have you don't have a return type, right? Because this is a constructor. We're not returning anything. What's the purpose of a constructor, right? The purpose of a constructor is to help you initialize the object, right? So there's no point of using a return type. We're not returning anything with the constructor. If you go to the definition, right? Constructor in the English language, right? The definition, right? It build or erect, right? Okay, don't have dirty minds there. Okay, but build, right? So it helps you build an object, right? So that's what a constructor is basically doing here. Uh, it helps you build the object, create the object, right? So we're not returning anything. We're just that's why there's no method, there's no return type. So access specifier followed by the name of class. Then you have the parameter, right? And then you have the constructor body, right? A constructor with no parameters is called a default constructor. You're going to have multiple constructors in your class, right? So if you look here, public employee, right? Let's say we have a class called employee, right? So you would create a constructor, you'd say public, and the name of that constructor would be the name of your class. So if your class was employee, you would use it however you spell it, right? If your class was ice cream, right, you would say public ice cream, right? If your class was students, you'd say public students, right? What kind of constructor is this though? The first one right here. What kind of constructor is this? It's a default constructor, right? Why is it a default constructor? Because inside you see the parameter, right? Parameters blue. There's nothing inside the parameters. That's why it's called the default constructor. And you're always going to have a default constructor in each class, even if you didn't make it. When you create an object, you would always use the default constructor, right? And here's another constructor from the employee class, right? But it takes in two parameters. So remember how in our methods, right? Like if we were to do our method calls, and when you create that object, you have to fill it out. It's almost the same thing like this, right? So here we create in our constructor, right? It takes in a name, string name, and an integer age, right? And then you would say this dot name equals name and this dot age equals age, right? We'll talk about more about this later. I'm just giving you guys the broad view right now, right? So now let's say we're done with our, if we're done with our constructors, we basically defined our class, right? Now how can you, so if we're done with our class, right? Now you want to create an object of that class, right? So basically in order to, so I'm gonna give you guys this real life example, right? So I don't know, let me open a Microsoft Paint, something. Some as they're about to witness Picasso. Okay, right? So here's just an analogy, right? So um, okay, this is just an analogy of class and object, right? So okay, so let's say I have my friend, right? Oh God, right? This is my friend, and this is me right here. Okay, I'm not gonna create arms, right? So this is me and this is my friend, right? And this is my friend's house. Okay, that's a door, whatever. And right, so this is my friend and this is his house, right? Inside his house, he has his stuff, right? Inside his house, he has everything that belongs to him, right? So now, basically, I'm saying like, hey, hey, Fred, can I, in order for me to get access to his stuff, right? If I want to use his stuff, right, I would need a key, right? He would need to give me his key, right? So I would need a key. So I would have to create. I'd create this key, right? Okay, so that's my key, right? If I have this key, I would have access to his house and everything inside his house. Do you guys understand that, right? I'm gonna show you. That's what object and classes basically is. So this is basically a class, right? His his house is his class, and everything inside his house. Let's say his bed, his kitchen, right? Those are methods and variables, right? And if I want to access that class, right, I would need to create an object, which is the key, and that would give me access to this, to his house, which is the class, right? So that's what basically class. That's what class and objects are basically, right? So you already have a class created, and now you want to access that class's methods, variables, and stuff, right? And in order to access that class's methods and variables, you would first need to create an object, right? So this is how you create an object. Uh, so you have to declare, instantiate, and initialize. So the codes set in red and green are all variable declarations that associate a variable name with an object type. Basically, saying so what so if I were to if I okay I exited out, but let's say if I were to get access to the employee class, right, I would need to create an employee object, right? So that object, what kind of type would it be? It would be employee type, right? So this is the type right here. So your object type is going to be the class name, so it's going to be employee, and then you're going to give it a name, employee one, right? Um, yeah, object. It's usually in the main method. You could create an object in its own class, but it's not preferred to. It's not. It's not used in your own class frequently. It's always like used in the main method or not. So when you're creating an object, you're usually doing in your main method, main class, right? So first of all, you have the object type, and then you have the object name, right? and then we use the new keyword. That's the instantiator, right? The new keyword is the Java operator that creates the object. You cannot create an object if you don't have the new keyword. So you're going to say equals new, and then this is where you use these blue things are your basically your call your are your constructors. These are constructor calls right here, right? So what kind of constructor is this basically right here? Default, right? This what kind of constructor is this one? Is basically this one right here. So this is a default constructor, and this is a constructor that takes in a string name and age, right? So here the string name and then it's followed by age. So you guys see the purpose of a constructor, right? It helps you create an object. So here I created an object called that, and it would have the variable, right? It would have the name as Kenny, and would have the age as 23. Here I created an object called employee1. We're using the default value, but inside our default constructor, we didn't set anything. But the thing is, this object has, let's say it has the variables name and age, right? Those are not set to anything yet. So those values are null right now. If I were to define my, if I were to define the name and age here, so if I said name equals John and age equals 20, right? And I use this default constructor call, what would the name be for this object? For employee one, what would that name be? That name would be John, right? Because in my if I defined it here and I said name equals John and age equals 20, right? If let's say I defined it here and I created an object using that default constructor, the name would be John and the age would be 20. All right. So now let's I'll suggest everyone to open up Eclipse right now. So we're gonna create a Java project and we're gonna learn how to use these stuff right now. So everyone open up Eclipse. If you think I'm going too fast, let me know. I'll slow it down and I'll repeat anything if you guys want me to, right? If you guys have any questions, don't think of it as a stupid question. Just ask me. It's better to learn right now than struggling later and having to catch up later. Okay, so we want to create a Java project, right? We could simply say file new Java project. Another way is just clicking on this, right? And then click on Java and then a Java project, right? So just create a Java project. We're going to create a Java project about books, right? So let's just create a Java project called books, right? We could give it any name. So I'm just going to call it books for right now. Okay, so you see I have books highlighted, right? This is my project name. Also have several other projects here, right? I have a project called Barnes and Noble Creator Phase 3 in practice, but we're involved in books, right? We're dealing with this project right here. So you would see an arrow to its left. So you want to expand it, right? So in order to expand that project, you would click on that arrow. Okay, so here you have two things, right? You have the library, right? Java runtime environment system library here. This library has all classes, right? So if you scroll down right here, you could see all these different packages, and these packages contain classes, right? There's so many, right? Uh, this helps us write in Java. We could use these classes and methods and whatnot. For example, if you see, no one click anything, just look at me because I don't want you guys to mess anything up. But for example, let me find something. So Java language, right? So if you could see your Boolean class, right? You could see a double class, right? You could see float. You could see there's so many classes, integer classes, everything, math, a long string, right? That's what the library basically is. So when we create a Java project, it would automatically import all those stuff for us. So we don't have to like create those. It would take forever, right? So Java helps us, and they have this library for us, right? So you have your source folder, and you have your library, right? So you would want to select source, right? So under source, um, once again, if you go back to the presentation, so you have a Java project, right? Then you have it, then you have a package, right? And then it's followed by a class, right? So we have our source folder. Now we want to create a package, right? So we're gonna say new package, and let's call this package. I'm a I'm gonna call it books, right? Um, you could give it another name, right? I can't think of any other stuff synonym for books, so I'm just gonna call it books, and press finish, right? So if I created a package books, right? I would want to put classes inside there that are related to books, right? I don't want to put an employee class under books, right? I would just create another package called employee, and I would have that employee class under it, right? So that's what packaging is. Packaging, it helps you organize everything, right? So inside this books package, you can see the box is still white, right? Because there are no classes inside there. So if you want to create a class inside there, you would have to select on books. You would have to select on your package. You would right click, new class, right? Or you could simply just click on this, and there's these buttons right here, right? It's basically a shortcut way, right? So here it says new Java class. You can click on that. Okay, so now we want to create a class name, right? So when you're creating a class, right, the convention is to always capitalize the first letter of the word, of every word. So since we're creating a book class, right, I'm just gonna say book, right? Um, so in this book class, I'm going to define it, right? So would I need to check on this? Would I need to click check on this? Yes or no? This is my book class. Would I need a main method in my book class? I'm defining my book class in this. So there's no reason for me to to click on this, right? Because this is not my main class. This is not where I'm going to run the main method. This is my book class where I'm going to define it, right? I want to create an object from this class. So there's no reason for me to put the main method there, right? So I'm going to press finish. And you see it's package books, right? Because the package name here is books, right? So if you were to change this like to BO, you would get an error, right? Because it'll say that there is no package BO, right? We only have package books, so you would have to, it has to be the correct spelling and stuff. Yeah, so you would only select the public static void main for your main class. So each Java project, right? Um, Keynotes about Java, right? Every Java application needs at least one main method, and that one main method would be in the main class. Hi Fahim, will you post today's mentoring video session? Yes, I'm recording it right now. So once it's done recording, it'll take like a couple of hours, and then I'll post it up to YouTube or something. Okay, so we created our class book, right? So now let's remember, let's go back to our PowerPoint, right? And this is the structure of a Java class, right? So what? So our what is the red part and what is the blue part for the thing that we just created? So this line we just created, what we used is public class book, right? So public class book, which is, and then it's followed by the open bracket and close bracket, right? So we basically created this part right here and this part, right? So now we have to fill this out. We have to fill out our class, right? With variables, constructors, and methods, right? So now we have to do these stuff. We created our class, right? But now we have to define it, right? How do you define it? How do you define your class? You declare initialize variables, you create constructors, and you create methods. Okay, so now we're saying, now we want to declare and initialize variables, right? What kind of variables seem fitting for a book, right? Let's just keep it, let's not create that many variables. Let's just create like 4, right? 4 or 5. So the variables here, your class variables, right? They're gonna be defined in top. Another name for them is called field, right? So if you look in our Java terms, you go to field, a data member of a class, right? Unless specified otherwise, a field is not static, right? So field is a data member of a class, right? So this is our book class, right? And we're gonna define our variables here. So we're basically defining our field. Okay, so give some examples of some variables you would define for your book class. So if you're dealing with books, what kind of variables would you need, right? So you guys are giving me variable types, but give me like examples. So price is one example. Title, right? We need the title of a book. So title would be a string, right? So that's one example of a variable. What else? Author, right? Genre, right? Those are what defines a book, right? So we're gonna need to. That's honestly the hard part of Java. If you can know what to declare, if you can know what to think of variable names and like for your class, the rest should be easy, right? So let's create a title, right? So what type of data type would a title be of the book? Would the title be an integer type? Would it be a string type? Would it be a double type? What's an appropriate type for a title of a book? Right? So if your book title was to be Harry Potter, right? And the Philosopher's Stone, right? What kind of data type would be fitting, right? How can you fit this into a data type? You would use a string, right? So we're gonna say string and we're gonna say title, right? What else can we put string with? What about an author? Is an author a string? Yes, right? So you could simply say string title, right? And then go to a new line, string author, right? You could do it like that, or you could just define it in one line. If making it in one line, it's cleaner, right? So we follow by a comma and we say author right here, right? Um, what else? Book, right? We need to know its genre, right? So what kind of type would a genre be? What kind of data type would a genre be? A string type, right? So we're just gonna add another comma and we're gonna call it genre, right? Okay, so now let's use a different what else? What else does a book have? A book has pages, right? So what kind of data type would pages be? Would it be a string, integer, double, right? It would be an integer, right? Because pages is where you're dealing with numbers, right? And what kind of what kind of data type holds a number? An integer, right? So how do we declare this again? How do we declare a variable? It's once again, right? Um, this is how you declare variables, right? So you have the variable type and variable name. So how would we declare pages, right? So we would say int pages. Does it matter if we capitalize? Just asking. Yeah. Once again, if you come here, right? Uh, Java is case sensitive, so it really matters what you're capitalizing, right? So if you said int right here, like capital I, you're gonna get an error, right? So we see the error here. It says int cannot be resolved with type. There is no class called int that's spelled with a capital I. So Java is super case sensitive. And when you're declaring the variable names, you would want to give it you want to give it lowercase, right? But if it's like if you're involving with like compound words, like let's say we're declaring genre, right? Instead of calling genre, let's say genre of the book, right? So you would say genre of the book, but you would have to capitalize the first letter of after the first word. and the rest of the words. So it would be of, right? Then it would be the capitalized with T, and then B would capitalize. So that's how you would declare a variable that's more than one word. But we're just using genre for right now, all right? Okay. So let's also since Mr. Mafi Bai introduced static, right? Um okay, actually I'll talk static after we define our class. Okay, so we have these variables right here, right? Um so we declared our variables, right? Did we initialize any variables? Yeah, we didn't initialize anything, right? But you could initialize, right, something, right? So you could initialize uh something like double, right? Tax, right? So if you were to buy the book, it would be this much, right? That's the tax, right? How much is it? Like the NYC tax is like 8 cents or something, 8.5 cents. So if you were to create a method that takes in the tax, right? If you were to purchase a book, you would. So this basically, I basically initialized the variable here. So I gave it a value. So you could declare and initialize variables in your class, right? So it depends how you write your project. But for right now, I'm going to remove this. But we didn't initialize anything yet, right? Okay, so let's go back to our PowerPoint. So let's look at the structure of a Java class, what we have so far, right? So far we have the class created, right? And now out of these three, what did we just finish? What did we just do, right? We just declared our variables. And now let's create our constructors, right? And then after construction, we're going to deal with our methods. So let's create our constructor here, right? So if you don't, if your class doesn't have any constructors and you leave it alone, then it automatically has a default constructor, right? But if you're making a constructor that takes that's not a default constructor, you would need to define the default constructor. So it's that's why it's always like recommended that you always create a default constructor even if it's not defined. So how do we create our default constructor, right? So if you go back to our PowerPoint, we say how to create it. So this is how you create it. You have the access specifier, name of the class, and followed by the parameter, right? Let me see if I can copy this. See if this works. Okay, right? So you have the access specifier, name of class, parameter, right? So what's the access specifier, right? It's gonna be public, right? What's the name of our class? The constructor name would always be the name of the class. Cool. So what's our name of the class? Our class is called book, right? So it'd have to be that you would have to put book here, right? And this is our default constructor, right? So does the default constructor have anything inside the parameter? None, right? So there you go. We just created our default constructor, right? Public book. That's it. We opened it and closed it. That's it. We just created a default constructor. Default constructor. It looks silly because we don't have anything defined here. You do not need to define anything. It's up to you how you want to define it, right? Okay. Um, so now let's create a constructor that takes in a title and an no, that just takes in a title. So how would you create a constructor that just takes in a title? So how would you create a constructor that just takes in a title, right? So let's fill this out, right? So we're basing this inside this, right? We're following this guideline right here. So what would the access specifier be? It will be public, right? What's the name of the class? Our class name is book. So it's going to be book, right? And we want to create a constructor that takes in a title, right? So if you just say title, we're going to get an error, right? We're not defining what that title, what type is title, what data type is title, right? Remember, Java is strongly typed. Whenever you pass something in the parameter, you always have to define the type of. So it's a string type, right? There you go. We just created a constructor that takes in a title, right? So now we need to define that method. We need to define the constructor. So let's say, what would you put inside this body? So if they were to say the title name is Harry Potter, right? So when you create, first of all, let me mention this. So when you create an object, right? An object basically has these values. Whatever variables you declared, that's what the object is gonna have, right? So if you created a book object, it's gonna have these. It's gonna have these inside that object, right? And it's up to you to like define those values. So what you would say here is you would say is that book's object, right? That's book's title is gonna be whatever that title is passed in the parameter, right? But you see the problem here, right? We get a warning, right? The assignment to variable title has no effect, right? Title equals title, right? That's almost like saying 2 equals 2, right? So this is really vague. The thing with this is that we have two things called title, right? So we have a parameter called title, right? That's what one of them is involving it, and then we also have a class in our field variable that is called title, right? So when we're referring to title on the left hand side, that's what the variable we're dealing with, and the right hand side that's the value we're assigning it to, right? So on the right hand side, that's the value we're assigning. So if they were to say Harry Potter, if this was Harry Potter, right? I mean, you're assigning that title Harry Potter, so that would fall on the right side, right? On the left hand side, that's what you're assigning. That's your variable, right? So if you want to if you wanted to connect it to this, if you wanted to refer to this, the this field's a variable, you would have to include this. So you see, if I click on this, if I click on the title here, right? You see this is highlighted. So this title right here is referring to the title right here. And if I click on this title, right, it's referring to the parameter here. So you guys understand that now, right? What's the purpose of this now, right? It helps you like um remove the vagueness, right? It helps you. It removes the confusing part of the constructor, right? That's what the purpose of this is. This relates to the class's variables. So okay, so once again, right? If I have let's say instead of title, right? I just call it uh blah, right? Then I could just say title equals blah, right? I could just create a constructor like that. But if someone else were to look at this constructor, they would ask me, what is blah? What does blah stand for, right? But when you're writing program, you want it to be clean and, you want it to be structured, right? So if someone else were to look at your program, they would not know what blah stands for. But we know what blah stands for, right? But someone else wouldn't know it. But it's good for other people to know. So that's why you want to give it an appropriate name, right? But the appropriate name happens to be the same name with our field right here, right? So now if you say title equals title, we're gonna get a warning. It's gonna say that it's basically saying that 1 equals 1. It's really vague. It doesn't know what title you're referring to. So we know one title is referring to the parameter, and one title is referring to this the field variable right here, right? So if you want to refer to this, you would have to include the keyword this. So now you see if I click on title, right? You see it's highlighted yellow. It's referring to this title right here. And if I were to click on this, it's referring to this title right here. So that's what the purpose of this is. Can we make it with all the string values? So are you saying that if we create another constructor, right, but that just takes an author, you would get an error? Do you guys understand why we're getting an error here? Because it's basically it's the same constructor, but this one takes the title, but this one takes an author. How are they the same? Do you guys understand why? Do you guys understand how you can't have a constructor that takes in the same parameter type? This takes in one string, and this takes in another. This takes in one string, but they're a different type. I mean, they're different name string, right? This is string title, and this is string author. How are they the same? The typing is the same. So you can't have a constructor that's the same that takes in the same arguments as the other types, right? So you can't have that. Um, someone said what is parameter? Uh, Mohammed Kabir. Parameter is basically if you were here earlier, we're talking about it in our methods and constructors. Parameters is what's inside here, what you pass into your method or constructor. Those are going to be the arguments basically. Okay, so we created a constructor that takes in a title, right? Let's create a constructor that takes in a title and an author. So how would you create a constructor that takes in a title and an author? You can't cure the error. You have to remove one of them. You can't have two constructors that take in the same data type. You would need to remove one of them. So how do we create a constructor that takes in a title and an author? Here we have constructor that takes in a title. So how do we create a constructor that takes in a title and an author? What do you have? What extra thing you would have to do? So we have the access specifier, right? It's public. The name of the class, what's the name of the class? Is book, right? And then we have to fill in the parameters, right? So if we fill in the parameters, we're taking in a title and an author. So what would we put inside the parameter? We'd have to put the title and the author, right? But what are these both? What type are these both? Title is what? String, right? So you have to say string title. And what about author? What type is that? String as well. So now we create a constructor that takes in a string title and a string author, right? And if you want to define the method body, you want to say the title equals to whatever is passed here, and the author equals whatever author is passed here. So once again, say this dot title equals title, and this dot author equals author. Okay, so we have three constructors so far, right? This is different. This this is different than the one that was before because this takes in two strings, right? This takes in one string. Okay, so I'm gonna give you. What am I? Will I be able to create another constructor that takes in an author and genre? Yes or no? Okay, I see three. Yes. Anyone else agree? Yeah, you always need a default constructor. So once again, we have a default constructor here. We have a constructor that takes in a title, and we have another constructor that takes in a title and author, right? Now I'm saying, since we have a title and author constructor, right? Can we create a constructor that takes in author and genre, right? And most of you guys said yes. The answer is no. Can you guys give me the reason why no? Why is it no? So let's check it right here, right? So public book, string author, and string genre, right? There's already a constructor that takes in both strings. That's why we cannot, even though this is title author and this is author genre, they're both strings. We cannot create constructor that take in the same amount, right? So this constructor already takes in a string. This constructor right here, we're trying to say it takes in a string. We're gonna get an error, so we're gonna need to delete one. Do you guys see the problem here? You guys don't, you guys, okay, so Josephine, so this constructor, right? What kind of data type does this constructor take in? It takes in a string and it takes in a string, right? It doesn't matter what the variable name is the data type we're dealing here. The data type is the important part of the constructor. So it takes in a string and it takes in a string. This constructor is doing the same thing. Although they're different variable names, this one is title and this one is author, this one is author and this one is genre, it does not matter. It's because this takes in a string, right? And it's taking a string after that. So both of these constructors take in two strings at the same time. So that's why you're going to get an error. You cannot create a constructor that takes in um, the same parameters as another constructor, even if it's different names. It doesn't matter. So string right here, and then you have another string right there. That's why you can. That's why you're getting an error. In order to remove that error, you need to simply remove one of those constructors. And let's remove this one, right? Okay. Um, do you guys understand that? That's very important to know. Okay, so yeah, we could make another constructor that takes in three strings, right? We could say title, author, genre, right? We don't have any constructor here that already takes in three strings. So let's create a constructor that takes in three strings, right? So there's a shortcut way of writing constructors. So if you want to write a constructor that takes in three strings, you could simply highlight this, right? Right click, go to source, uh, go and then generate constructor using fields, right? So once again, if you guys didn't catch that up, so there's an easier way of creating a constructor is you could highlight your variables, right? You could highlight all, even if you want to, right? You're gonna right click. So you're gonna highlight your variables, right click, go to source, and then generate constructor using fields. And then here you simply select what variables you want to construct with, right? So, but since we're trying to make a constructor that takes in three strings, our strings were title, author, and genre, right? So we're gonna deselect pages because that's integer. We're trying to make a constructor that takes in three strings, right? So now here's the insertion point, right? Where do you want to insert it after? So we don't want to insert it after genre, right? Because genre is the variable type. The variable it's a string variable, right? We want to declare it after our last constructor. So our last constructor, it was a book string type, right? So we're gonna declare it after here. So we're gonna say after book string, right? And then we're gonna press OK. And then you see it here. It created a constructor, and it has this defined. And also say super. You could remove super if you want to. We'll deal with super in next week's class. So you can see here it created a constructor that takes in three, right? How would I create a constructor that takes in all the parameters, right? Title, author, genre, and pages. You would do the same thing again, right? You could simply manually type it if you want, but it will take long, right? Once again, you could just simply right click your variables, right? Highlight it, right click, source, generate constructor using fields, and now you want to select all. Where do you want to insert it? I want to insert it after the constructor that takes in three strings, right? String. There you go. We can remove super, right? So you could create your constructors. So your constructors basically here, right? They're almost like 20 lines of code, right? You could easily write 20 lines of code in less than 10 seconds, right? Um, So you would have it just right click this and source and then generate it, right? Okay, so how many total constructors do we have here in this class? How many constructors did we define? I mean, we have in this class? So we have 5 constructors, including the default, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? So this constructor takes in one argument, which is the string. This constructor takes in 2 arguments, which is a string followed by a string. This argument takes in 3 strings, right? And this argument takes in 3 strings and then an integer, right? Any questions? Okay, so now let's go back to our PowerPoint, right? And let's see our structure, right? So this was the structure of a Java class, right? So we're dealing with a book class. So we have the access specifier class and the name of class, right? We declared our variables, that's check, right? We created our constructors, that's a check. Now we want to create some methods, right? So now you're generating your constructors. Now you want to create some methods, right? One one basic method, right, is basically an example of a basic method is a get method and a set method, right? A get method, it'll return you that variable's value, that uh, right? And a set method would set that variable to whatever you would want, right? So we could manually type a get and set method. Okay, so I'll talk about the getters. These are called getters and setters, right? So these are methods that get and set values to these variables right here. All right. So let's create a get and set method for title, right? So if you want to create a get method, right, we look at our structure of a Java method, right, which is right here. It has the access specifier followed by the method type return type followed by the method name followed by the parameter, right? So let's go back to Eclipse. So we want to create a method that would get the title. Do we need another class for main method? Yeah, we only have one class right now, but we would need to create another class for main method. I'm going to do that later. Right now, I'm just worried about this book class, right? So I want to create a method that would get the title, right? So the title right here. So if I create a new object, I would want to get that object's title. So I would need to create a method. So first the public specifier, right? So what public specifier would I use? I would use public, right? And now this is a get method, right? So what's the purpose of a get method? It's to return a value, right? So what kind of return type would I have? So if I'm trying to get title, what should my return type be? If I'm trying to get the value of title, what should my return type be? It should be string, right? So we have our access specifier, and then we have our return type, right? And now let's give it a name. So we're gonna give it a name called get title, right? Okay. What about inside the parameters? Are we gonna need anything inside our parameters? If we're getting something, do we need to put anything inside our method that will help us get it? Do we need anything inside the parameters? We don't need any help, right? So a parameter basically helps your method. But for this, we don't need any help from the parameter. We just simply just need to return the title, right? And what are we returning? We're returning title. So that's a get method, right? Now let's use a set method, right? Let's create a set method for title. So what's the access specifier? It would be a public, right? Are we using a return type for, what would the return type be if you're setting something? If we're initializing something, do we need a return type? If we want to say x equals 10, right? Do we need a return type? The answer is no. We don't need to return anything. We're just setting it to a value. We don't need to get any, we do not need to get the values information. The purpose of this method is to set the title. So if the book was let's say it was Harry Potter's and the Sorcerer's Stone, right? And then what you call it, J.K. Rowling, she said that she changed it from Sorcerer's Stone to Philosopher's Stone, right? That's what the current name of the book is. So that's how you would use the set title method. So you would set the title to Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. So are you returning anything? You're not returning anything when you're using the set method. So you're gonna say void, right? And then we're gonna what's the name gonna be? It's gonna be set title, right? And are we taking a parameter? Yes or no? If we need to set the title, if we need to give it a new title, we're gonna need to know what that new title we're giving it, right? So we're gonna need a parameter here. We're gonna need help here. We're gonna need to know what what's the title we're giving it. What title are we giving the object to? So we're gonna need to say string title right here, right? So, and how would we assign it? Is basically using the this operator, right? So you say this dot title equals to the title that's passed on the argument right here. And right here you have your basic getter and setter method. Can you show one more how you make int constructor? Integer constructor. What do you mean integer constructor? Here I have a constructor that takes in all parameters and it also takes in the integer pages. These are constructors right here. Josephine, why didn't you say new? Um, when we use the keyword new, we use it when we're creating objects. But right here, we're creating our methods, right? We're not creating any objects. Okay, so we have our get title, right, and set title right here, right? Now you would want to, we just did that for this variable, right? Now you need to do it for author, genre, and pages, right? So that would take a long time, right? Manually typing it. So you could simply just highlight your variables, right? Right click, source, and then right here it says generate getters and setters, right? Getters and setters, these are methods, right? So you would click on this, and then you would want to click on what you want to create a getter and setter method for. So far I only did it for title. So title doesn't show up here because title already has its getter and setter method. So I'd want to click on author, genre, and pages, right? And where do you want to insert it? Should I insert it after pages? Yes or no? Remember, we're creating our methods here, right? So if you looked at the class structure, these are the variables right here. These are the constructors, and these are your methods. So you want your methods to be at the bottom of your class. It's just it's a good practice doing that way, right? So we want to set it after our last method that we created, which was set title. So we're gonna have it after that. And here you could sort it by any way. If you want it in getter setter pairs, so it would say get author and then set author, or if you do it this first, it would say get author, get genre, get pages, and then it would say set author, set genre, set pages. But I like it in pairs, right? Pairs is more reasonable. So you press OK. Now you see here it created these methods for us, right? We didn't manually have to type it in. So it created it created a getter and setter method for us. Okay, so would you guys agree that our class is defined here, right? So we almost have 60 lines of code, right? 60 lines of code defined for one class, right? Um, you could have all done this by using the shortcut, and it would have taken you. You could have created this, right? If you guys are fast typers, right? You guys could create this less than 1 minute. You guys could create this whole class in less than 1 minute, right? If you guys use the shortcuts and whatever. What is the purpose of creating a method? So the purpose of creating a method is, let's say you have a class book, right? And it has no methods, right? And now you want to create an object of that object of book. So now you go to your main method and you create an object of book. Great. Now what, right? What will you do? There's nothing to do with that book object. You want how are you gonna know the information of a book, right? How are you gonna know the book's title, right? How are you gonna know the book's author? These methods right here help you do that. So when you create an object, these methods, they would help you uh, do that thing, and we'll see an example, right? Okay, so now we finished our book class, right? So now we need to create another class. What is that class? Now we need a main class, exactly, right? So what's the purpose of a main class to have a main method? What if you don't have a main method, right? Will you be able to run anything? Will you be able to run your program if you don't have a main method? No, right? You every Java programs needs at least one main method, right? That's the entry point of your Java project. So here we have books defined. So let's create a main class, right? Okay, so I want to show you guys something. So let's say under this package, right? I create my main class. Let's create our main class. I'm gonna call it main. Since this is my main class, is gonna have my main method. I'm going to check on this, right? And I'm gonna click on that. And it'll say auto-generated method stub. That basically means that it automatically generated for you. So you can remove this comment right here. If you accidentally forgot to check it, right, it will just create a class like that. Once again, there's a shortcut way of instead of manually writing, right, public static void main, instead of manually writing, you can just say MA and then control space, right, and then click on main method, this one, enter, right? Okay, so now let's say we want to create an object, right? We want to create a book object, right? Um, right here, I'm just showing an example of what's it like to be under the books package, and what if we created like I'm gonna show the difference between having a main class under a books uh package and or having a main class under a different package, right? So let's say we created it under this books package, right? So now let's go back to here. How do we create an object, right? In order to create an object, it requires a class. Do we have a class? Yes or no? Yes, right? We have a class called book. So we're allowed to create an object now, right? If we didn't have the class book, we wouldn't be able to create an object. A class provides the blueprint for objects, right? So our book class, right? It's a blueprint, right? It has everything defined there. It has author, title, genre, right? And all those methods, right? Okay, so now we want to create an object. So you want to declare, right? And you declare it by calling that object's type. So the object type would be the class name, and then you would give it a variable, right? So our class is book. We want to create a book object, right? So how would we create a book object? What's that? What's the book object's type? It's going to be a book type, right? So we're going to say book. You guys have to understand why this is written like this. Don't memorize how. Don't memorize it. You guys need to understand why, right? This first thing right here is the type of what's the data type of your object, right? What kind of type your object is, right? So it's the same thing as variables right here, right? This is a type, right? You have a type, then it's followed by the name, right? You have the type, right? You have the type, which is a boolean, is followed by the name. Same thing right here. You have the type followed by the name. So our type should be book, right? And then it's followed by the variable name. So let's just call this book1, right? So this right here, what do we do? Do we declare something or do we initialize something? What did we just do? Did we declare an object or did we initialize an object? What is this basically? We basically just declared an object right now. If we initialize something, we gave it a value. We did not give this object. We did not give this object any value. We didn't even create the object. We just like declared it, right? So now we want to initialize the object, right? Initializing the object, basically giving value, right? So go back to here. Equals new, right? The new keyword is the Java operator that creates the object, right? So if I say new, right, it creates the object, right? But now the new operator is followed by a call to a constructor, which initializes the new object, right? So now I need to use a constructor, right? What constructor can I use? Can I use any of these constructors here to call that object? Yes or no? Yes, right? I could call on this constructor to create that object, right? I could call on this constructor to create an object. I could even use the default constructor to create that object, right? So let's say we use this let's say use this constructor to call on that object, right? So we're going to use the constructor that takes in a title and author. So how would you do it? First of all, what's that constructor signature? The constructor signature is a book followed by a string title followed by a string author, right? So we're going to say new, we're going to say book, then it's going to have a title, and then we're going to have an author. Now it's up to us to give that a title and author, right? So let's just say Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, right? And followed by a comma, right? And then we're gonna need to give it an author, right? So what's the author? It's J.K. Rowling, right? Semicolon. Okay. So right here we just created a book1 object, right? We created a book1 object. That's our object's name. It's a book type, right? And we created it using the constructor that takes in a title, right, which is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and an author, which is J.K. Rowling, right? Okay, so let me just copy and paste this, right? Let me remove this, right? So let's say I didn't have main class under books, right? So I'm gonna delete main class, right? Let's say I created a new package, right, called main, right? Finish, right? And inside that main package, I have my main class. So I'm gonna call a class called main now, right? Public static void main. Okay, so now I'm just gonna copy and paste what I did. Okay, so why am I getting an error now? If I copied the exact same thing, right? You're getting, why am I getting an error now? There's a reason why I showed you why I'm showing you guys this. So there's a reason why I showed you when the main class was inside the books package, and now exactly, right? Now my main class is in a different package, right? So it's under this package. So in order to have access to this, right? In order to have access to that class, I need to import it, right? How do we import something, right? You need to give it a connection. How do you give it a connection, right? You type in import, right? And what are you importing? You want to import this, right? So where's this? So you want to import book. That's not going to work, right? What are we missing? We're missing the package where it came from. So the package is called books. So you're going to have to say books dot book. And you see the error is gone now. So we imported books dot book, right? So we imported books, right? Which is the package name. And then we said dot. And then we said book, right? Book is that class name. So you guys understand that? You guys see that, right? So if we have a main outside of if we have a different package, right? And it has a main class, and if you want to create an object of a class that's outside of that package you're in, you need to import that class. So that's how you import. Okay. Okay, so here we have a book one object, right? It has the value Harry Potter's and the Philosopher's Stone, right? Um, okay, so let me create an extra method, right? Let me go to my book class, and I'm gonna create another method, right? Let's create another method called let's call this method read book, right? So the purpose of this method, it would print out that I read, right? And whatever that title's book was. That's it. And whoever the author was. So let me write it here. So so we want to create a method that prints this out, right? I mean that prints out I read title by an author, right? Okay, let's look so let's look back into our PowerPoint and let's see how you create a method. So this is how you create a method. So now let's all create a method that would print this out to the system using system.out. So how would we create this method? All right. So what would the access specifier be? Right. We need the access specifier. It would be public, right? Method type and return type. Are we returning anything? Yes or no? We're printing out to the console, right? That prints out to the console. Are we gonna need a return type? Yes or no? I only see 2 no's, 3 no's. If we're not returning anything, we're gonna use void, right? Okay, so we have some part of the method down, right? And now what kind of name should we give it? So the purpose is to just print out that, right? So let's just call it read book. All right. Will it take in any parameters? Yes or no? Okay, this one is a bit tricky, right? You could put in parameters, but okay. So let's just say we're using parameters, right? So let's just say so we want to say the title and author, right? So what are we going to put in the parameters? If we want to print this out, right? What are we going to need? We're going to need help, right? So what are we going to put inside the parameter? We're going to say string title, right? And string author, right? Let me just Okay, so now inside the method body, right? I just need to print this out, right? Do I need to declare or initialize any variables here? Yes or no? I don't need to declare or initialize any variables, right? Since my main goal is just to print this out in the console. So you don't really need to declare initialize anything. So we're just gonna system.out.print, right? You could say print, right? But if you add an ln, that prints it line by line. And most people use ln. So I'm just letting you guys know, right? Right. So we're gonna use that. What are we gonna put inside? So we want it to match this. What are we gonna put inside here? So what are we gonna put inside here? So what is this basically? This is basically a string, right? So we're gonna need to system.out.print a string, right? So I read a title by author, right? So we're gonna say I read, right? Can I just put title right here? Yes or no? Can I just say this? What is it gonna print out? So if the title was Harry Potter and the author was J.K. Rowling, and I call on this method, what would it print out? So would it print out I read Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling if I use this method right here? What is it gonna say? It's gonna say I read title by author, right? Because you basically hard coded inside your method. So you don't want to do that, right? You want title to be whatever titles pass on the parameter, whatever passes on the author, right? So how are you gonna do that? You're gonna concatenate it, right? So I'm gonna say I read. Make sure you leave a space, right? Because you don't want to say I read Harry Potter with no spaces. So you're gonna have the space, right? And then you're going to concatenate it, right? What are you going to concatenate it with? So are we going to concatenate it with the title, or are we going to concatenate it with an author? So it says I read title, right? So we're going to say title, right? And then we see it says by, right? So if I want to say by after the title, what should I do right here? So this is a string, right? So I'd have to concatenate it with a string again. By, right? Okay, so by author, is that good? Yes or no? No, right? It's gonna. So if I were to put Harry Potter right here and J.K. Rowling, it would say I read Harry Potter by author, right? We forgot to pass in. We forgot to concatenate author. So you're gonna say by, say plus, then you're gonna say author, right? So now it's gonna read I read Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling, right? So now if they were to pass any title or any author, it would say I read and whatever that title is passed on. See? So you guys understand concatenation. When you guys get to Selenium, right? And when you guys are creating your like an API, right? Common API, you guys have to understand how concatenation works because it's going to use a lot of concatenation. Okay, so let's just copy and paste this, right? So there's a reason why I said you don't really need parameters inside this, but we're going to show you why, right? Okay, so public void read book. I'm getting an error. Let's spot this error. So multiple markers in this line. Oh, it's because the brackets are not the same as the Eclipse brackets. So I was using the Word brackets, Microsoft Word brackets. So those are different. Okay, so I would say I read blah, right? Whatever the title is by author, right? Okay, so now let's call on this method, right? Let's test it out. So here we have a book, right? A book one object called Harry Potter's and the Philosopher's Stone. by J.K. Rowling, right? So let's say book 1, right? How do we get access to that method, right? You would say the object's name, and then you would follow it by a dot, right? Now you can see you have access to books methods right here, right? So now you want to what method are we using? We're using read book. So now you see it takes you have to put in title and you have to put in author again, right? But in book 1 we already defined the title and author. So we could still do it like this, right? But what do we have to put in title? What what do we put in title? Why would we hard code Harry Potter in here? There's another way to do this. Think of your getter and setter method. You could use getter and setter methods inside other you could use methods inside methods. Don't forget that. You could use methods inside of other methods. So I could call the get method here, right, for my title parameter. So how would I call on the get method here? Okay, so yeah, so I'll say book 1 and I'll get title, right? So what am I trying to get the title of? Book 1, right? See? And then what about author? What do I do for author? Book 1 dot get author, right? Okay, so if I were to run this program, you guys think would work? Yes or no? It should work. I read Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone by J.K. Rowling. Okay, so first of all, you see how there's no space here. So let's go back to our method and let's just add a space right here, right? Let's run it again. I read Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone by J.K. Rowling. So do you guys see how it works? You guys can call methods inside of methods. You guys can call methods on methods, right? So here, book1.get title. What is that giving me in return? So if read books, if read book takes in a title and an author, I could use any method inside. I could use any method as long as it returns a string, right? I could use any method for this as long as it returns a string, right? Does this return a string? Book one dot get title. Does that return a string? Let's look at get title method, right? Get title. It returns a title, right? And what do we declare title as? A string. So that's why we're able to do it. We're able to use this, right? But there's another way. Instead of doing this, right? This is a long way of doing this, right? Putting in book one dot get title. You could have simply just said. You could have simply just removed these parameters. Do you guys think will that work? Yes or no? If I remove the parameters, will they work? Or how many people say no? And how many people say yes? It's going to work. You'll see how. I read Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling. Alright. Do you guys see why? You guys. Alright, so. Okay, so if we come back here, right? System.out.print. I read a title by an author, right? This title is referring to here, right? This author is referring to this author, your field variable. Why? It's because when you create an object, that object will have these already um, declared inside that object. So when I created book one, it already had these variables, right? But when I created book one, I only used the constructor that fills out the title and author, right? So title is already filled out, author is filled out, right? But genre and pages, they're null, right? We didn't give it any values yet, but it still has these variables right here. So if I call this method right here, right? I read title by author, it would say title of this, right? It would say this title. Or if you want to be careful, you could just say this, right? Same thing. You're referring to that field's variables. Do you guys understand that? Whenever you create an object, that object has those variables. Whatever you will have that field. You guys understand that? Yes or no? Okay, so um, does book one, right? Does it have a genre? Do we give it a genre yet? Okay, let's create another object, right? Let's create an object called book two, right? So after this example, we'll have our break for 10 minutes. So, but this is very important, right? So let's create another book object using the default constructor, right? What kind of values does book two object have? So let's look at our default constructor, right? This is our default constructor. We didn't define anything inside there, right? So what kind of uh so the book two, what would the title of book two be? What would the title and author of book two be? Let's use the read book function, right? So let's comment this out. So what do you guys think would print out here? Are we gonna get like some sort of error because we did not give it any values, right? So the thing is, we're gonna see I read null by null. What is null? Null is, I don't know how to explain it, but null is when when you don't have anything set. Yeah, it's almost similar to void, right? Let me see the actual definition. What is null in Java, right? Uh, it's basically nothing, right? It's like it has like it's not set to anything. It's basically the dark hole of the universe, right? Like it's like I don't know how to explain it, right? I can't even explain null. But it has no values. It contains nothing. That's basically it. Yeah, it's basically empty. Yeah, there you go. Right? It's basically empty, right? We don't have it. We don't this object book 2, it had the variables. It has these variables, but they're not assigned to they're not initialized to anything. They all have null values, right? That's what the purpose of a constructor is. Constructor helps you create that, right? So if you want to give it values now, right? If we were to give it values, we'd have to use the set method here, right? And then we have to set author, like, right? Let's say uh, red town, right? And then we have, oh no, that's the author, right? Let's set the title. And then we have to set the author, right? Let's just call him Gary Johnson or something, right? and then we'd have to set. Then you had to set the other stuff as well, right? You had to set the genre, fiction, blah blah, right? You would have to set the values, or else they're going to be null, right? So what's the purpose of having an object that's just going to have null values? Is literally pointless, unless you just want to use that object. You want to use that class and methods, right? So now, if I were to say book two dot read book now, right? What should it print out? We defined read book in in the method right here. So it'll print out I read, and then we'll get the title and then the author, right? So what would this print out? So it'd say I read, right? Red Town by Gary Johnson, right? I read this title by Gary Johnson, right? I read Red Town by Gary Johnson. So you guys so did you guys see that? You guys see what the purpose of a constructor is, right? You guys see like the purpose of having more than one constructor, right? Instead of having default constructor, you could have a constructor that takes in all parameters. You could like fill out your object's information in one line, right? Instead of like having to use the set method like 5 times in order to give it values. So if you want to get the fiction, right? So we could just say system.out.print, right? And then we could say book two, right? And what methods did we create? We created get and set methods, right? Yeah, field variables are the same as instance variables, right? So we say book two dot get get genre, right? And it should print out fiction. There you go, fiction, right? So what does the get genre method do? What does the get method do? It returns whatever you're trying. It returns whatever you're trying to get, right? So if you were to get title, it would return title. If you were to get genre, it would return genre. Right here, we use the system.out.print, and we called on book two, and we use that method get genre, and it printed out fiction. Right? If I change it to like this, right? It would print out that, right? So book two dot get genre, we set the genre to this, right? Book two dot set genre. This is what the genre is, right? Line 15, is it necessary? Line 15 is a book read book. I'm just showing that. I'm just showing the method. Like, I'm just showing you guys the difference between having an object that had no values when it was null, and then I set the title and author, and then I said read book, and then it says I read Town by Gary Johnson. That was just like my main showing. Okay, so now it's 8:15. We'll be back 8:25, right? If you guys want me to go longer today, I can go longer, but I'll give you guys like a 15-minute break or something. But if you guys are willing to stay longer though, or I could just give a 10-minute break and we could end like 9:30. It's up to you guys. 10 minutes? All right. All right, come back 8:25. In the meantime, I'm going to write trivia. All right, it's 8:25. Just type in yes if you're in the chat. I, I don't want like I want at least like 10 yeses. All right, that was only like 5, so we'll just wait like 1 more minute. Can you extend 5 minutes? For my break? Yeah, sure. Well, I'm just gonna spend the next 5-10 minutes for trivia. So, and after that, I'll talk about static variables and static methods, and final if we get up to there. So for the people who are here, so the first question, can you help us study how to study? Yeah, API. Yeah, sure. Um, that was like my main goal for today, right here. So far we learned how to create a class, right? Declare initialize variables, types of variables, create methods, and create objects, right? That's what we did so far. If I have time after I talk about static and final, if I have time for APIs, I'll talk about the string and scanner. And if you have time today, we'll go over these APIs. Okay, so the first question I asked in trivia, right? I'm asking if these valid. So I'm assuming these are in my employee class. Can I have these two constructors together? Yes or no? Are these constructors allowed to exist with one another inside a class, inside the employee class? Yes or no? The answer is no. Why? Why is it no? Remember, I talked about this briefly, right? It doesn't matter with the variable name, right? What does it matter about? It matters about the variable type, right? So in both of these constructors, what kind of parameter are they taking? They're both taking in one parameter and they're both string. So you're not allowed to have both these constructors together inside a class. You need to delete one. There can only be room for one constructor that takes in a unique data, right? So here you see the constructors. This one takes in a name, right? String name. This one takes in a company, right? Although they're two different names, right? This is a name, this is a company. That doesn't matter. That constructor doesn't care about that. A constructor cares about the type, right? But there's already a constructor that takes in a string type. So you can't have another constructor that takes in a string, right? You would have to add in another string inside the parameter, right? Or or have like a different or have like a different thing, right? So what if I say can they exist together? Yes, these can exist together, right? Because this takes in a string, right? And this takes in a double. But if they can't have both the same thing, right? Okay, so let's move on to example number 2. Assuming both of these are inside a class together, can they exist? Yes or no?
So how many people say yes? And how many people say no? So the answer is yes. These this is valid, right? Let's look right here. Let's go back to our book class, right? So let's say yeah, so order of your parameter matters, right? So here this constructor takes in a string, then it takes in a double, right? Here this takes in a double, then a string. They're they're defined differently. The order is defined differently. If this was string, right, and this was double, and this was a string and this was double, it would have given you an error. But a lot of people are getting mixed up because they're taking like the same parameters, but the order is different. So you're allowed to create constructors with different orders. So let's see it in this example right here. So if you see this example right here, it takes in a string, 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 integer, right? I could create another constructor, right? Book, and I could say string title, right? And then I have int pages as the second parameter, then string author as the third, and string genre as the fourth. You see? I could create it. It depends on how your constructor depends on if it's duplicated, right? As long as it's not duplicated in an order that's, duplicated in that way. So as long as it's in a different order, right? Okay. All right, true and false. You can only have one constructor in the class. What is that? True or false, right? That is false. You could have more than one constructor. You always need to import classes in order to create objects. True or false? False, right? Um, you only need to import classes in order to create an object when if it's outside of a different package, exactly, right? But if it's inside the same package, you don't need to import the class, right? Um, is this a valid initialization? Yes or no? This is false, right? How can I make this true? If I add in what? Quotations, right? So if I said this is John, right? Then this would be true, right? But since it had no quotations, it's false. What about D? Is this a proper initialization? This is true, right? So ID number, that's a variable name. It's type integer, and I gave it, and then I assigned it numbers. So whoever answered these wrongs, please understand, especially if you answered C and D wrong, please understand the concept of variables and like declaring, initializing, and the types. You need to understand the typings. If you don't understand typings, right? If you don't understand that, uh, that's what basically classes are, right? When you declare these, you create methods about these, right? If you don't understand these basic steps, you won't be able to move on. So I'd suggest, go over my PowerPoint, which is right here. Read over this, right? And also read the book and also look at YouTube videos, right? Okay. Now this one, right? Are these correct instance calls, right? Assume that class has all the constructors defined, right? So what about this? Is this a proper instance call? True or false? Well, yes or no? Is this a proper instance call? It's not a proper instant call. We're missing something, right? We're missing a parentheses, right? So this part is correct, right? Sport basketball, the new, right? And then we're using constructor, but this isn't a constructor, right? It's missing this, right? So it's missing that. So this was false. No, right? Missing, right? What about this? Sandwich, tuna sub equals new sandwich. with parameters tuna and 545. Does that seem valid? Yes or no? Yes, right? Because you see that type and class is consistent, right? And then you have the tuna sub as a name, and then you have proper parameter callings, right? What about this? Income, January's income equals new income 3100. Is that a proper call? Yes or no? This is a proper income. I mean, this is a proper instance call, right? A method call. So you have the type again, right? You have the name, and then you say new, and then you use that constructor, and this takes in the integer, right? How about this? Employee equals new employee John Doe and 23. Is that a proper object call? This is not correct, right? What is it missing? This part seems correct, right? What about the left hand side? It's missing something, right? It's missing a name. There you go. Okay, so let me just give it one more example. What about this? Is that correct? Okay, let's say employer, right? That's false, right? Because we're trying to create an object of employee type, but we're using an employer constructor. We can't do that, right? So we'd have to change it, right? So that was false. So you guys understand proper object calling and stuff, right? All right. So now let's talk about static, right? Static variables and static methods. Before I move on to that, does anyone have questions on basic Java class and these methods? Okay, so let's move on to static, right? Mr. Mafia said it best, right? Dropbox, right? That's basically it's a static feature, right? We all have access to Dropbox, right? But if one of us were to change something inside Dropbox, it will change for everyone. That's what basically static is, right? So if I go to my book class and let's say I create a book object, right? Each object will have its own set of title, author, genre, and pages. That's what they're gonna keep to themselves, right? So if I have a book one, right, and then I create a book two, right? Will book one and book two have the same variables? Will it have the same field? No, right? They're gonna have their own. They're gonna have their own. They're gonna have their own title, their own author, their own genre, and their own pages, right? That's what static comes into play. Static makes it where every one of those objects share the same value, right? So just think of it like the Dropbox, right? So what? So let's create a static variable, right? Let's create a static variable called count, right? So if you want to declare something static, just simply write static before what you're declaring. So let's say I was just declaring int count, right? And this was to keep track of books, right? So let's not use static for right now, right? So let's just say every time you create a book, count plus plus, right? Um, no, static is not final since it's gonna be changing, right? Well, it depends on how you program. But for this, we're not gonna say it final. We're gonna talk about final after. So let's just have a variable called count, right? So that means every time a book object is created, the count variable would go up plus 1, right? So when you say count plus plus, it increments it by 1, right? So let's add that to all of our constructors. Okay, so you see how all these constructors have count plus plus, right? So, okay, so I'll repeat again. So basically, I'm trying to show you guys the difference between non-static versus static, right? So here I have an integer count, right? The purpose of this variable count is to keep track of how many books objects we created, right? So that's why I have count plus plus inside every constructor. So if I were to create an object here, right? Let's say I create, let's say I create, right? I created 2 new books, right? So it would say the counter, if I were to get the count, it would say how many? What would it return? It should return 2, right? Because I created 2 book objects. So that's what the purpose of count is. So I just have an integer count here, right? So now let's look at it, right? So now we want to print out how many uh we want to print out the count, right? But the thing is, in order to uh um we can't, it's gonna print out 0, right? So let's look at this. Book one, wait, let's create a get method for this, right? So we need to create a get method for count, right? So let's create the get count method. So does everyone know? So it will be public, right? So we're getting the count. So are we returning anything? Yes or no? Yes, right? What are we returning? Int, right? Let's call it get count. Do we need anything inside our parameter? If we're getting something, do we need anything inside our parameter? Yes or no? No, we don't need anything, right? We're just getting the information. So we don't need anything inside the parameter. And we're just simply going to return count, right? All right, so we have our get count here, right? So let's say it won't make sense to, so you see how, like, in order to get the count of books, you would need to call in an object to get the count, right? So that just sounds weird. So let's say book to count, right? Get count. What should it say? What will it print out? It's not, it didn't print out anything, right? Um okay, so we're we want to keep track of don't you have to set method for count? No. I forgot to declare it here. So let's say we didn't get anything, so we have to give it int, we have to initialize it, right? So int count equals 0, right? So it's gonna start from 0 because before it wasn't set to anything. So now let's see if this will work. We're still not getting anything. Okay, so basically when you're using a non-static variable, right? It won't keep track of everything of it won't keep track of every object you create. So what you're gonna have to do is make this static, right? So if one object was created, right? Let's say if I create one object, this is gonna go to 1, right? And if I create another object, it's gonna go to 2. But all those objects will have that variable count to that value. So now if you want to, we change this to static, right? We would need to change our get method to static. So we would say public static, right? I think it was after static. I think it was after public. Yeah. So we would have to change that into static, right? Okay. So now in order to when you create static variables and static methods, you do not need to create an object for it. That's the that's one good reason of creating static variables and methods. You do not need to create an object in order to get access to that class's static variables and static method. How can you get access to it? What can you do? Does anyone have any idea how to get access to that static variable or static method? So if I create a static variable and a static method, so this is my static method, right? Get count, right? And this is my static variable, static int count equals 0, right? I do not need to create an object in order to access it. If it wasn't static, I would need to create an I would need to create an object in order to get to that class's variables and methods, right? But for static, you don't need to do that. You simply have to just type in the class name. So what's our class name right here? It's book, right? And you see here we have access to we have access to the static method, right? Why don't we have access to the count variable? I mean the field right here. Why don't we have access to that? Simply because since it's in an outside package, right? In different package, you need to assign the you need to assign it the you need to say it's public, right? This makes it where you can access it from outside of a package, right? So now if you see if I do book dot, I have access to count variable, right? And I have access to the count method, right? So it depends the what modifier you put here. So but I don't really need this. I don't really need to get access to this variable if I have the static method, right? So I could just leave this not public. Um, this static method would be enough for me to get count, right? So if I want to print this out, right? So I'd have to say system dot out dot println, right? And I put it inside my parentheses. What should it print out? If this is a static method, which returns a static variable, it should return 2, right? 2. You see? Um let's create 4, right? And let's just say 3, 4. So I created these book objects, right? And now I want to get how many I want to get the count, right? So I want to see how many books objects I created. So I use this method, right? Public static int count, right? It returns count. Count is a static variable and it keeps track, right? How does it keep track? Because inside our constructors, every time we create an object, right? So let's say we use the default constructor, right? Each object it takes the count and it increments it by 1. So every time we create an object, it says count plus plus. But right here, you see we initialized it to 0, right? We started it off as 0. If we say count plus plus, we create two objects, it's going to say 2, right? What if we set this to 5? What if we set to 5 and we created two objects? What would the count get returned? 7, right? Exactly. So that's why we just started off with 0, because we want to keep track of how many books there are, right? So now we just created that many book objects, and now we're going to print out how many books we have. We have 12. Do you guys see how static works? Static variable and the static method. Just think of the Dropbox example Mr. Mafi showed. If one person changes everything in Dropbox, if that one person deletes our Selenium folder, all of us, it's going to happen with everyone, with all of us. What is the formal definition of static variable? I was going to add that to this week's glossary, but let me just look online. What is static? in Java, a static member is a member of a class that isn't associated with an instance of a class, right? You saw how ours is not associated. Instead, the member belongs to the class itself. You saw how when we got access to static variable, right, in method, we didn't need to create an object. We just had to call on the class itself, right? We said book dot, right? And then we had access to that static variable in method. As a result, you can access the static member without first creating a class instance, right? The value of a static field is the same across all instances in of the class. So does that make sense? All right. Now let's talk about the final keyword, right? Final. What does the word, when you guys think of the word final, what do you guys think of besides finals from like school and stuff? Well, you could think of it like that. But final, right? It's set in stone, right? It cannot be changed, right? Um, so let's create a final method. I mean, final variable. So earlier I was talking about the variable tax, right? So in New York City, the tax is what, 8.5 cents. So let's create a variable, a final variable that called tax, and we're gonna assign it that, right? So first we're gonna say double, right? Because tax is a double type, and then we're gonna assign it 0.85, right? That's the tax, right? Okay, so now we want to make this final, right? So all we have to do is just add the keyword final, right? Okay, so this is adding final. That means this is never going to be changed, right? Um, so it's up to us, the programmer, if we want to change it or not, right? But the tax has been the same price for a couple of years, right? I still think it's 8.5 cents in New York City, right? So this is our tax, right? So now let's create a method uh, using a final, right? We're not going to create a method that says final, but we're going to use the final variable. So this is how we'd use the final variable. So let's say uh hold on, let's add another variable called cost, right? So that would be the price of the book. Let's call it price, right? So that would be the price of the book, right? So let's just add it to this constructor right here, right? So and then we'd have to say this dot price equals price, and then we could set a getter and setter method for this, right? So I want to have it after. Okay, so I have a I included a new integer variable called price, meaning the price of the book, how much it costs, right? So now I'm gonna create a method called checkout, right? Hold on, give me a second. Okay, so the purpose of this method, right? It would it would calculate the total cost of the book, right? So it would calculate it by taking the price of the book, right? And then it would uh add it with the tax, whatever tax is, right? So you guys understand what I'm trying to say, right? So let's say the book is $15, and then that method it would return the total cost plus tax, right? So let's create that method right now. So the access specifier is public, right? Are we returning anything? Yes or no? If we're trying to get the uh, if we're trying to get a value of the price of the book plus the tax, that means we're returning something, right? What are we returning though? Um, let me change. Actually, let me change this to int is not preferable. Let me use double, right? Double makes more sense. So I have to change this to double price. And then I have to change the getter and setter, right? So you see I'm getting error here. Since I changed it to double, I would have to change the return type to double as well. And set this price, right? I would have to change this to double. Okay. All right. So the return type would be double. We're returning the cost plus the tax, right? And let's call this checkout, checkout book, right? Are we taking any parameter? Yeah, we could put in a parameter, but remember, look at this method, right? We don't really need to put anything inside the parameter, right? Because if we were to call this method in the main class, we would have to say get book. We have to get book object, right? Dot get price, right? So we don't have to really put anything inside the parameter. We could just say this dot get price. You guys understand what I'm trying to say? All right. So we don't have to put anything inside the parameter. Okay. Um so now we need to create. Let's create uh a variable to hold our answer, right? So let's declare a variable. How would you guys declare a variable that would hold our answer? How would you guys do it? Let's do that in the first line of this method. How to declare a variable. So we want to declare a variable that will hold our answer, right? So we're gonna say, yeah, total price. And what type would this be? Everyone, I want you guys to answer. So what would the type of this with the thing that we're trying to give the answer to, right? We're returning an answer. What type would that be? What data type would it be? Would it be an integer? Would it be a string? It has to be a double, right? Because we said we're returning a double here, our answer has to be a double. Our return type is double, so that means we have to return a double. So we're going to say double total price, right? All right, here we just declared it. Now we want to initialize it, right? You could initialize it in the same line right here, but I'm just doing it in a different line, right? It's the same thing. So we say total price equals. Now we want to include the price plus the tax, right? So how do you get taxed? You get taxed 80, you get taxed for every dollar, right? Or something? I'm guessing that's how you get taxed, right? Everyone agrees? Does everyone understand how, tax thing, right? So if you say, yeah, so in order to see how much you get taxed, you do price times uh 8.5 cents, right? So we're gonna say price, right? We're gonna say this dot price. You could just say price, but this dot price, you would understand why. Do you know why we say this dot price? Because we're getting that object's price of the book, right? We're getting that object's price of the book. So if that object's price, if you created an object, right, and the price was $10, this dot price would be $10, right? You guys understand that? That's why we didn't need anything inside the parameter, right? So now we use this dot price. Um, okay. So now we have to add it, right? What do we add it with? Inside the parentheses, we multiply this dot price times tax, right? Do you guys agree? You guys understand this? So if the tax was 8.5 cents, right? Tax is our final variable here. It's never gonna change, right? We have it declared here. It's never gonna change, and we're just using this in our method right here, right? So so let's say if the book was $20, right? it would be $20 plus 20 times 8.5 cents of it, right? So it'd probably be like almost like $2 or something. So it'd be like 22. I don't know, right? And then what? What are you gonna do after here? If we're done with our algorithm, then what? What's left to do? Return, right? So what do we return? We return the value. But where is our value stored, right? Our value is stored in total price. So we're gonna return total price, right? You could also use before the return value, you could also use a system.out method, right? So instead, if you do it here, you don't have to call in the main method, right? So it saves you time. So let's just say it right here. And let's just say the price of, right? So the price of what? Can we still get the object's name of the, can we get the book's title here? Can we put the title of the book here? Yeah, we could put the title of the book here, right? So we say plus title, right? And then we could say by, right? By the author, concatenated, right? And then we could say is, right? And then we could add like a dollar sign, right? Because we're saying the total cost. So let's just say the total, let's say the total checkout of blank, of title by author concatenated with a string is, right? And then what are we going to put here? Yeah, you could put this dot title. But the thing is, the reason we don't need to put this, right? Because it knows what title we're talking about. We don't have title defined in the parameters. So it knows what title we're talking about. But if you want to be, secure, you could just put this. It doesn't matter. All right, and we could say this dot author, right? Oh, we're missing a, okay. It, it knows the author because when you're creating an object, it will, remember, when you create an object, it has these values. I mean, it has this, right? The object will have the title, it'll have the author, and the genre will have the pages. And this method is simply just calling that object's title and that object's author. Do you see? So what would we put here? So how would we finish it? Remember, you don't need to do this inside the method, but it's easier for us if we do it here. Then when we call in the main method, we don't need to use system.out.print. So yeah, we'll put total price right here, right? Okay, so now let's call this inside our main class. So let me delete all, like 3, right? So first I need to create a book object, right? That uses the constructor that takes in all of it because I didn't put double price in these, right? So let's call it book 4, right? And I'm gonna call this Harry Potter again. By the way, I never read a Harry Potter book. It's just the most common name I could think of. And the Philosopher's Stone, right? And then it's followed by a what? What is that constructor followed? Then it's by an author, right? I never read books, man. The last time I read a book was in middle school. Then it's genre, right? What type of genre is Harry Potter? I would say nonfiction, right? And then it's followed by right? It's followed by pages and then double price, right? So I'm gonna say it's like 300 pages, I think, and then I'm gonna give it a price of $14, right? and I'm gonna end it with a parentheses. So right here, you see how this cuts off, right? I'd have to go on the right. You could just simply just come here and press enter, right? And it would add a comma for you, right? So that's perfectly fine. So here I created a book for, and I use this constructor right here, and I pass in all parameters, right? Now I want to use this method, right? I want to use I want to use checkout book, right? So do I have to use system.out.print here to print out the value of checkout book? Do I need to do this? No, right? Because inside our checkout book, I already have a system.out.print, so I don't really need to do this, right? So I could just say book4.checkout book, right? And now let's run it. The total checkout of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone by J.K. Rowling is $15.19. So you guys see here, we created a book object, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone by J.K. Rowling, right? It's nonfiction, has 300 pages, and it's $14, right? And in our checkout book, which is our method, right? We in that method, it takes the price of that book, right? And then it adds it with the tax, right? What's tax? Tax is our final variable right here that we declared here. That we declared it to be 8.5 cents, right? So then it returned and then it prints it out in the message, right? That's what it does. So $15.19, right? So let's see if that's accurate. So let's go to our calculator right here. So it's $15, right? So 15 times 0.085, right? That's $1.275, right? Then we added by 15 again, right? 16,275. Oh, what? Wait, did I add this? Did I add that wrong? I think the algorithm's wrong then. So it takes in the price, right? Plus this price times tax. So what was the price originally? It was 14. Oh, okay. It was $14. It was $14. I put $15. So 14 times 0.085, right? $1.19. Yeah. So then you added by 14, right? 15.19. So there you go. $15.19. It makes sense, right? So you guys saw how we use the static variable, static method, and final, right? Okay, so can we move on to APIs? I'll just quickly go over some API right now. All right. So one API, if you guys want to understand API, and uh, um, this is how I learn. This is how I get more proficient in Java. Like for me, I basically practice, right? And I look at different APIs and I look at it and I use their methods and stuff. So that's how you understand that's how you would understand advanced programming. So if you're programming, right, you want to create a GUI, right? You would need to understand the GUI API and stuff. You need to understand uh, a JFrame and those stuff. Selenium, right? If you want to learn how to do Selenium, you're gonna need to understand the Selenium API, right? All these APIs you could find it in the Java API right here. So just type in Java API, right? And it's gonna be the first link, right? In the Oracle Help Center. So these are all the classes right here, right? So let's say I want to look for the string, right? String class. So I'm just gonna control F, right? string. I'm gonna do string right here. All right, I'm gonna keep pressing enter until I see string. So I found string right here. I'm gonna go and click on string, and this is the string class. And here you could see all these um methods and stuff. Yeah, string. Yeah, string is it's a funny term. We don't really say string is an object. Um, it's its own reference. It's like when you call when there's you have reference variables, and that's why there you have arrays, you have strings, and then objects. So, but in Java we have a class, a string class, right? And it has all these methods. So it's almost like an object, but it's really it's something tricky. You'll see, right? So here when you go down, you see all the constructors, right? These are all the constructors, right? This is the default constructor, right? Initialize a newly constructed string, and then you have all these constructors that takes in parameters. So you guys are familiar with constructors today, right? We went over some different types of constructors. And we see how these takes bytes and whatever. It takes ASCII, it takes bytes, right? It takes strings, it takes integers, it takes in all these different stuff. So these are your constructors, and then your method summary. Um, these are your methods right here. So here you have these different type of methods, right? You have character at, right? Um, it tells you the description. It returns the character value at the specified index, right? You have more methods right down here. So all you have to do is just get familiar with the API. You simply have to just look at these right here, see what they return and stuff, right? So let's go over some string. Let's go over some string methods, right? So I want to let's say I want to hold on, give me a second. All right. So let's create a string, right? So how do we create a string? We remember a string has its own class, right? So it's almost like creating a new object, right? So you're gonna say string, and then you're gonna give it a variable name, right? So let's just call it ft, right? But the reason it's not an object is we don't have to use new for string, right? But let's give remember remember what I said earlier. Um, I could use methods inside of methods, right? Remember what when I said that? You could also use that for you could use return. You could use methods that have the same return types. So if I have a method that returns a string, right? Can I set that as a string? Can I set that as a string value? So if I have a method that returns a string, right? Can I set that to st? So would this make sense right here? So if I say book4 dot get title, does that make sense for you guys? Do you guys see how this can be set as this can be given this value right here? What does this value return? Right? What does this value return specifically? What does this value return? It returns the title of the book. So what's the title of book 4? We set book 4 here to be Harry Potter. So this is basically saying st equals this right here. But we just referred it using this method right here. Right? This method is referring to the title of the book, which is Harry Potter's and the Philosopher's Stone. But that's a string. That's why we're allowed to do this. Do you guys understand that? Do you guys see how and why? Right? If I were to say, let's say I comment this out. If I were to say string st equals book 4 dot get page, the get price. You guys see the error here, right? Why am I getting an error? It returns an integer type, right? This basically here refers to the book's price, which is 14.0. But the thing is, this is a type string, so this has to be a string value, right? So that's why we're allowed to use this right here, right? we're allowed to use this right here. We are allowed to set st equals to book4 dot get title, because book4 we call the object here and we constructed it, and that book4 title is Harry Potter's and the Philosopher's Stone. So this is basically saying string st equals Harry Potter's and Philosopher's Stone. This is just referring to this, but this returns a string. That's why you're allowed to assign it this. Do you guys understand that? If you guys can think out of the box like this, you guys can program like endlessly. You guys can program like this is just the beginning, right? If you guys can think like that, that's what programming is. So you guys have to think it like that. You can't just think of, you can only assign string st just string characters right here, right? You can only assign it like that. You could refer to something else that returns a string, right? Okay, so now let's use the string class, right? So let's use system.out.print, right? So I'm just gonna system.out.print. I'm just going to copy this and let's call on some classes, right? So st, that's our string name, right? So what you call it? We're gonna say st, right? And then we're gonna press dot. You see all these methods right here? All these methods? That's basically all these methods in this class, string class, right? All these methods you get access to simply by pressing st dot, right? Why why are we allowed to access these methods? Because st is a string type, right? And string has its own class, so we're allowed to use that class's methods. So let's use some of these methods right here now, right? So let's use the character at method, right? So ch right here. So if you hover over this method, it says returns the character value at the specified index, right? An index ranges from 0 to length minus 1. The first character value of the sequence is at index 0, the next at index 1, and so on, right? So if we use this method right here, it just explains what that method does. So let's say this is our string, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, right? If we wanted to print out A, right? I mean, if you want to print out A, what index would that be in? What index would A be at? If it said the index starts with 0, what index would A be at? So if it starts with index 0 is H, right? Index 1 is A, right? Index 3 is R. Index 4 is R. Index 5 is Y. Index 6 is what? What is index 6? It's a space, right? Index 7 is a capital P. Index 8 is a lowercase o, right? So let's say let's see if it returns a P, right? So what index is at P? So it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So let's put 6, right? So what should this return? It should return a capital P, right? There you go. You see? It returned a capital P. So this method character at, it returns whatever character is at that index, and we fill out that parameter with the index, right? So now let's look at another method. Let's look at the method called length. So this method st.length, you'll be using it almost in all your programming life if you ever decide to program, because it's a common method call. So it basically tells you the length of a string, right? So if we do st.length, right? Let's hover over it. What does it say? It returns the length of the string. The length is equal to the number of Unicode code units in the string, right? So we're gonna do length, right? And let's see what's the length of the string, and it's 39. It's 39 things. You guys want me to count on? Let's go. One. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, right? This method basically tells us how long that string is. So if we had like a long string and we want to count it, this method does it for us. Let's look at another string method. Let's look at substring, right? So substring right here. There's two methods that takes in substrings, right? Each has a different parameter. But let's use this one right here. Let's read it. It returns a string that is a substring of the string. The substring begins at the specific begin index, which is the first parameter, right? And extends to the character of the index end index minus 1. Thus, the length of the substring is end index minus begin index. So let's check this out, right? So let's give it a beginning index. Let's say 0, right? That's where it's going to start from. And let's end it at 9, right? What's it going to return? It returns Harry Pot, right? So from 0 to 9, from 0, right, to 9 is going to return that string from 0 to 9. And it returned Harry Pot, right? Okay, so let's look at another method, right? String method. Let's look at index of, right? st dot index of. So what does this method do? It returns the index within the string of the first occurrence of the specified character. If a character with value ch occurs in the character sequence represented by the string object, then the index blah blah blah. So you could basically read it, right? So this one basically tells you what index that character is at, right? So if I click on this method, so it's gonna take uh, uh, int character, right? So I want to know basically what index is let's say p at, right? So I could just type in p, right? And it tells me it's at index 6. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So right here, right? P is at index 6. If I put let's put h, right? It should be 0, right? Yeah, because h is the first is in the first index. So now let's put r, right? So what should r print out? A lowercase r. What should that print out? This is our string, right? So what it should print out the first r it sees, right? So the first r it sees is this one. So this has position index 2, right? So it'll print out 2. Remember, it reads from 0, 1, 2. Okay, so another important thing is another one is you can use a sharp substring, right? Let's use another substring, right? So st dot substring, right? Let's use this one right here. So it basically takes in the, let's say if I put in 13, right? It'll take in the 13 first indexes and it'll print that out, right? Oh no, this one starts from number 13, then prints out after. Okay, so this method, it starts from number 13 and then prints out whatever is left. So we put 13 here, so it would count from 0 to 13, and it would ignore what was before 13, and then from index 13 and onwards, it would print out. So it was Philosopher's Stone. Let's see this method. Uh, let's see, if you want to know if your string is empty, right? You say is empty. That I think that returns true or false value. Yeah, it does. So it returns false, right? It's the string is not empty. It's actually filled out, right? Let's look at another. Let's look at does it contain, right? Contain. This is another important method, right? So let's see if it contains a sequence of characters. So let's say if it contains let's say if it contains pot, right? It's true, right? Do you guys see why this gives true? So it's we asked if it contains a capital P o lowercase t, right? And that's right here. What if I put what if I put stone like this? Would it be true or false? Would it print out true or false? It would print out false, right? It's because it depends how exactly you type it. Here we have stone, we have S capitalized, right? Here we have a lowercase. It's gonna print out false, right? So there's another method, right? Here, if like let's say if you're writing a method and you want to know if it contains that, right? And you hate if it's like, and this is an issue, right? The uppercase and lowercase. So you could also change that by simply saying st, right? And type in 2, and then you could change it to either lowercase or uppercase, right? This will change it to lowercase. It will change the entire string into lowercase right here. So I changed it to lowercase right here, and this one would change it to uppercase, right? Oops. Harry Potter and Philosopher's Stone is uppercase, right? So, and let's look at another, one more final method. And this one would say it would be replace, right? Replace, right? So right here, um, let's use let's use the one that takes in. Yeah, let's use this one right here. So let's replace stone, right, with ball, right, or rock. Yeah. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Rock. So you guys see these methods, right? How do you guys access to these methods? You simply have to call on. Simply have to say dot, and then you have access to that methods. How would a good way of learning these methods is simply going to the API and just looking it over here. They tell you they specifically go over each thing. So let's say if I want to go briefly over to uppercase, right? The thing that changes it to uppercase. Let me just write it down here. So let me just right here. So it's right here, right? So converts all the characters in this string to uppercase using the rules of given local. So they explain it like in a detailed way, like what does the method do, right? It returns the string converted to uppercase, basically. So an AP, going to the API, that's why Mr. Moffy wanted you guys to look over 5 APIs, right? He wants you guys to see how he wants you guys to get familiar with this because when you guys are working with a company, um, a company has their own protocol, right, of how they're doing their stuff, and they all have their own APIs. So Mr. Mafia is going to show you guys an API next Saturday, and it's gonna be something with the text message thing, and it's basically an API used by Uber and Lyft and all stuff used for messaging. So it's very good to understand how to read APIs and stuff. Mohammed Kabir said, "Why did it count J.K. Rowling?" Um, because I said the string st to get the title. I didn't say the author. J.K. Rowling is the author. So right here, this parameter constructor, it takes in the title first, right? This is the title, this is the author, this is the genre, this is the pages, and this is the cost, right? Because I use the constructor, I use this constructor right here. I use this constructor right here, which is a title first, then it's followed by an author, followed by a genre, followed by pages, then price. I called on that constructor here to create my object. No problem. All right, so it's 9:30. I haven't gone over I couldn't get in time for the scanner API. I'll talk about that either tomorrow or Wednesday. I'll see. Um, so that'll be it for tonight. If anyone else have questions, let me know right now. Yeah, I'll post the video. I'm going to convert it as soon as I end the training of this class. So what did we do? Basically my goals today, we couldn't do scanner API, right? Yeah. But we did this. We did these stuff right here. So if you guys, honestly, if you guys can master this right here, if you guys can master this, mainly this thing right here, you guys know how to create classes and create objects, then using using APIs, right? APIs would be so easy for you because APIs follow the same thing as. So in order to use an API, you need to create an object, right? So if you know how to do these stuff, and if you guys teach yourselves new keywords like static and final and all those stuff, you guys will be in good hands. What you call it? When I was in college, um, they didn't focus that much on these stuff, right? So they moved on these topics very fast, and then they introduced to us like different APIs like buffered reader, uh, file, right? File reader. Uh, what else? They more APIs, and I was just lost, right? Uh, because I didn't know how to do the basics. I didn't know what these APIs did. I didn't know what these methods were called. I didn't know how to do the method calls. It's because I didn't know the basics, right? Once I learned the basics of these constructors, everything else made sense. APIs were so easy to understand, and that's what programming is all about. You're using classes. You're gonna use classes to create objects, to use their methods and whatnot. That's what you're mainly doing in Java programming. So as long as you guys understand these stuff, you guys should be in good hands. So keep on practicing this stuff. Make it like your second language. Any other questions? Uh, I hope I helped you guys today. If you guys like came into this mentoring knowing some stuff, I hope like it cleared it up for you guys. Or if you guys are new, I hope you guys learned at least something. So I'm gonna upload my notes and I'm gonna convert the video. Oh, to submit the homework, all you have to do is go to Dropbox, right? Um, click on homework, right? So you want to see what homework is due. So this is homework 2, homework 2 week. So you're gonna answer these questions, uh, put it in a document, right? So once you're done with the document, you're gonna go back to the homework submit, and then you're gonna create your folder here. You're gonna create. If you don't have a folder here, you're just gonna type in new folder, and you're gonna use your ID and then followed by your class, right? So once you're done that, you're gonna go inside here, inside your folder, and then you're gonna right click. You're gonna upload new files, or simply just drag it in there, and that's it. So let's look at this week's homework. So write a Java application, show the use of multiple constructor, and use static variable and static with final variable. So this is what we did today, basically, right? Write a Java application using a string class. You use 20 to 25 to 35 methods. We also did this, but we didn't use 35 methods. I guess we used like 10, 15, but you could use more, right? Continue working on code lab. Else you should solve 50 to 100 exercises. Also do this, right? Uh, read. You guys also joined the mentoring session, right? And review the materials since first day of the class. So that's basically the homework. Anyone have issues with their clips or they want help? Don't feel shy. Let me know right now. What can we do if we stuck on code lab? If you're stuck on code lab, uh, I shouldn't be saying this, but like first you want to try, right? Get like try it yourself, and then if you don't understand what the problem is saying, talk to someone in the group discussion, right? If they don't respond, you might have to look in Google and look at the answer. But when you look at the answer, you need to understand why. Don't just the answers are in Google, but just don't go to Google and write down the answers. It's not helping you. If you go to Google and you're just copying the answers, then you're being cheated out of your $25. You're basically paying $25 just to cheat. So basically, just don't cheat. Try, right. If you're stuck, then look at Google, and then then understand how and why is that the answer. So have like Google as your like last priority for your code lab. All right. Anyone else? Anyone else have they need help setting up their Eclipse or anything, or they have errors? Just let me know. I don't understand the second question. So the second question, write the Java application by using string class. So it's basically this, what we did right here. And he wants you to use like 25, 35 methods of that string class. So we only use some of the methods, you know, keep on like, it's literally this exact same thing right here. So just inside your main class, just create like a string, right? You could say, you could give it a value, whatever, and then just use those string methods on that uh, string variable. All right, no problem. All right, so I guess that's it for tonight. Let me see who's mentoring tomorrow. Uh, so tomorrow is Gahina Debauchery and Masin. So they'll be mentoring tomorrow, but I'll be there. I'll be in the chat, and if you guys, I'm gonna help them mentor as well. So, and if they're done, I'll take over whatever's left until 9:30 or whatever. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. So they're gonna mentor tomorrow. Then Saha and Ibrahim are gonna mentor Wednesday, and then Mehdi and Alam are gonna mentor Thursday. Asi's gonna mentor Friday. Thursday and Friday, I'm gonna introduce the new concepts. I'm gonna introduce object-oriented programming concepts, and that will help you get into the weekends class with some knowledge. All right, so that's it for tonight. See you guys tomorrow. Good night.